out. Hello, hello. We have Alan here today, Alan Gorthy, who I call my biodynamic mentor. I think 2018 when Blue Borage was just starting and I was like wandering aimlessly, Alan had just arrived in Auckland and I tagged along to every workshop he taught. So welcome, Alan. Thank you for being here. Can you tell people whereabouts you are right now? Because you're far, far from Auckland, different climate, but still in New Zealand.
Yeah, currently I'm in Cromwell, which is in central Otago. I've taken over managing a hydroponic herb farm, which is a little bit away from normal biodynamics, I guess, but it's farming, which is in my passion, so it kind of checks a little bit of a box. And yeah, we mostly are doing coriander is probably our #1 seller, and parsley, and dill and all those type of things. So grow them on succession, and got seed trays going. They go in the top, or go in the holes and cut them up, put them in a bag, and do it again. It's a lot of repeat process.
So people down your way, if they see cut herbs in the supermarket, there's a chance you've grown them.
Yeah, so we try to do the local. We only cater to the local region. We are that kind of small still, so that's where we live with our base. And yeah, we were actually on the Master Chef thing that was airing. They were using our herbs and have a little thing on there, but they're sponsored by Pam, so they don't ever say our name. Like, it's either Pam's or us or somebody in there. But yeah, we got that little thing. Basil and Parsley is the name of the company.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, I asked you to come and talk about calendar planning because you're whiz.
Yeah.
So most of my customers are home gardeners, suburban, few lifestyle blocks, and a few flower farmers, kind of.
Cut flowers or edible flowers?
Cut flowers, hobby flower farmers that are starting to sell beautiful bouquets and get into it. I don't know if the name Blue Borage attracts people who like flowers.
Probably.
There you go. So mostly women, a few blokes, and obviously people who are watching this are on board with biodynamics, curious, wanting to learn from like as many different people as possible. And we don't have that many people in New Zealand talking about the climate here. And you've been here for a few years now. You've lived in Auckland, a few different places. Yeah, you've worked on vineyards.
Yep.
So
been here since 2013. Been in the north and in the south more than in the north. Yeah, and growing is, if you're talking climate, is also location. So it does come into effect to have people that are talking about things that are in your region, or the things happening there. I mean, if we're going to talk about biodynamics, one of my main foundation pillars is site specific. It's where you are. It's not so much where your neighbor's place could be completely different than just your place. So everybody's in a different situation, and it's an individual, kind of that individuality of the farm sort of thing, concept. Is made up. Yes, most things are made up of the same minerals, and you're going to have these different types of things in your soil or your air or wherever it's going to be, but the quantities and dispersion and amount of topsoil you might have, or clay, or any of those things, or trees, native trees, non-native trees, whatnot, are all different. So yeah.
How long does it take you to get a sense of the soil in a specific site? Like, can you dig a spade and feel it and know, or do you have to sit with it for a few weeks?
Well, I would say through observation. I mean, it comes down to looking at what's there a lot too. So first off, if I'm looking at a new place, I'm probably going to look at just what's there. So if I see a bunch of pine, I'm going to go, okay, well, we're working with an acidic soil. It's low shallow pan, high tree, you're going to end up with a lot of needle drop, and what am I going to be able to do with that? Or you might just see stumps from previous trees that were there and be like, okay, those roots are still there, because those tannins and whatnot are something that you really want to take into consideration if you're talking about soil, and the things that were previously there, add to the current situation. And it doesn't, I mean, so you have that side of it. Trees, large trees are a really big indicator. Then starting to look to the lower stories. You have bushes, whatnot, because diversity is going to add into that soil makeup as well. I'm a strong believer in having a lot of, thank you, Adobe, having a lot of diversification throughout your property is a good thing. It doesn't have to be the more is better, but some, just having more than just a monocultural crop sort of situation. So if I look there, I'm starting to see that there's life in in that region, because in biodynamics, we're not just talking, and for me, I'm not just talking about soil. I'm talking about the water, I'm talking about the air, and I'm talking about the soil. So we're looking at below ground, at ground, above ground, and higher canopy sort of thing. So, do you have things that are filling all those, and why are you not? If you don't have any large trees, is it a wind situation? Is it a sun situation? Is it a soil situation? Is it a water situation? There's more usually than just soil in those cases. But to your first point, if I throw a spade in the ground, you can look at the soil and say, you're looking for biodynamically, I'm looking for an enlivened soil. I'm looking for things, is there movement in that soil? Can I pick out a nematode or a worm or something that's in there? Are there, what's the makeup of the soil? And I'm probably looking at the ground cover, the grasses or weeds or anything like that. They're going to show you disruption. They're going to show you, if you have a bunch of thistle, that patch has probably been scraped off, and those are plants that are trying to rebuild, or gorse, or those type of things in a field. It's because that paddock's been stripped and it was a forest before, and so what wants to grow is gorse so that it can become a forest again, because it's a cedar plant to trees in our climate. So understanding that makes it easier for you to, sometimes know why that gorse is there and what you're fighting against, and going, oh, okay, well, there's still roots of a forest here. There's seeds in the ground that are telling it that there's a forest here. So those are, I guess, some basic observation. I'm looking for life. I'm looking for birds. I'm looking for bugs. I'm looking for, in the water, in the air, on the ground, like what is around you. I mean, observation in biodynamics, I think, is probably the number one tool. Everyone wants to turn to preparations and
technicalities and calendars,
calendar, or any of these things, which are all good tools, don't get me wrong, but they're I think the best tool is still the farmer, and the farmer's ability to understand his site and to diagnose things quickly and correctly to heal their farm.
Yeah, cool. So how much unfolds over the course of months? And how much can you start making decisions day 2, day 3 in a new place?
So if you jump in a new place and you want to grab the calendar out, as that we're saying, is just start where do I start sort of thing? Is that, or how much can you get? It's an interesting question. I'm trying to, sorry.
It's when you say observation's the best tool, how long do you observe before you start making some big changes and planting and setting things up?
I gotcha. Yeah.
Because I know for me, it can be 3 or 4 months, even a full year before I see the subtle.
Totally. Yeah. Being on a place, it at least takes, if not a year, multiple years to understand the finite details of wind patterns, water patterns, and unless you want to dig up your whole site and understand what the soil structure is below everything, to see what's underneath you as well, takes time. But mostly those first two, the weather patterns and the water patterns. Where does your water pool on your property when it gets oversaturated? How many times do you flood on your property a year? And when it does, where does it wash out? You don't want to spend a bunch of money and put a, avocado strip on something that's going to flood all the time, because your trees will turn yellow and die on you, and you're like, oh, why happened? Oh, I was on a hard pan and I didn't know it. So there's definitely some things you can find out quickly through tools like, you got a windstorm going, so apologies for that. There's tools like soil sampling, or water samples, soil samples, those type of things to give you some quick insights into what's going on, what the makeup is. But again, we're talking about a living thing, and so if you want to observe it in its habitat, you need to observe, and you need to watch and
keep watching and keep
watching and see what's there. I mean, if I show up in June in Central Otago and I want to, guess what problems I'm going to have in summer, I'm not going to have much luck, because I'm in the middle of a frost zone, and there's no canopy, there's no, there's no birds here to tell me, am I going to get a giant starling influx in the middle of harvest season? Well, that's something I won't know until I've actually been here.
Yeah.
So I don't really recommend people just jumping on property and, getting and changing it too much. But at the same time, if you've done your due diligence and you have a plan and you have, what you're looking for, you got to start sometime. What are you gonna do? Sit around for 3 years and stare at a property and wait for the value to go up to 5 million a price? Like, that's not going to work, is it?
No. And so many people I work with are like itching to get into growing food, making soil, growing flowers, and you can do a lot straight off.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with, but I guess to some degree, like, if you're going to do a giant demolition thing, and you're going to you got a lot of stuff going on, if you're going to change everything, what's it really matter? Because you're going to rip everything up and you're going to have to start anew again, right? Everything you move, you're going to have to rebuild your living soil, you're going to have to rebuild your plants, you're going to have to rebuild your soil structure, water structure, all that stuff. So if you're going to go in that far of it, then what's it really matter to just rip it all up? But if you're just starting with a small patch too, like, why not? Okay, so let's go back a second. Through observation, if I'm going to try to find, then I'm going to use that observation to try to find what would be an ideal patch for me. So if I'm in winter and I'm looking for something, I'm looking for the place that isn't soggy. Where's my place in Auckland that I can walk around on that clay soil that isn't squishy? All right, well, that's telling me that I have, a little bit of soil and drainage, and I can, depending on what type of crop, again, that's going to be,
it all depends.
Number one situation that you got to look at is, what am I trying to grow here? I guess if I stop my rambling for a second, one more time, bear with me. A lot of this comes down to planning. If we're going to talk about the calendar, what you're looking at, you got to come with some sort of plan. You got to understand what you're doing. So I'll use myself for example in this case. Now, hydroponically, it doesn't work, because that's a controlled environment and that's not doing the same. But I grow, different herbs in the ground as well.
Do you live on site?
Yeah, I live on site. Yeah. And so now herbs are a little different because they're, perennial crop that I don't have to plant every season and whatnot. And the rosemary has changed, the rosemary patches I have changed the soil to be a common name for rosemary already. So I don't have to do a lot of work there. But if I take that crop as an example, then I can plan around it. When do I want to put it in the ground? When do I need to prune it? What are the things I need to do? Are we talking about something fresh? Do I need to make cuttings? Do I need to make seedlings? Do I need to make, I need to plan that all out before I even get to the calendar, because without that information, what am I really planning? I'm just looking at dates on a calendar and seeing what's, optimal for what. I need a task. So we need the task. And then whatever that task is going to lead us into that planning, I guess, and trying to figure out, from
Yeah.
calendar or sight or through observation, what we're trying to do. And
Okay.
all of them are different, yeah, because some things want waterlogged soil, some things don't want any water, some things want sand, some things want heavy clay, some things want soil, so
And that's what makes it so much fun, right?
yeah, so you just got to know what you're dealing with. That's another part of the observation and the tools to have that relationship with the individual that you're working with.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, I'm going to share my screen and pull up a calendar. Hope this works. This is it here. So I've got the Astro calendar by Brian Keats, the calendar from the Biodynamic Association, and then I've got a screenshot of the ephemeris, which
Sure.
Alan's able to describe. Can you
Well,
see that?
Yeah, so can we go back one slide for a second, Katrina? Just to talk about them a little bit. So
Yeah.
Astro calendar, I guess I don't know your clientele, so I'll just kind of go into it. Astro calendar from Brian Keats is going to be Southern Hemisphere specific, but it's also going to be from a Australian standpoint, which isn't too far off from us, but it's still from their standpoint. Biodynamic calendar, New Zealand is going to be more from our standpoint, which only changes it a few hours per day sort of thing, but it does make a difference when we're talking about the stars moving across the sky. And the last one, a lot of people aren't familiar with what an ephemeris is. An ephemeris is a log of planetary movements from an astrology standpoint, not an astrologer standpoint. And that's a big thing to understand between the ephemeris and the biodynamic calendars.
Sorry, did you say from an astrology or astronomy?
Astrology. An ephemeris is built from an astrology mathematics. So it is not the same thing as a biodynamic calendar. They're not the same dates. Now you set it up so that it's on a different a normal one. You have it set up.
Oh, do I?
Sidereal, was it Sidereally? Siderel. And you can set it up so
Can I change the settings?
Yeah, there's like 6 different books, and you got to make sure that you're looking at the right one.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
Like I was saying, for the people that don't know the differences in the calendars or what they are, the Astro calendar from Brian is a biodynamic calendar from a Australian perspective. He writes in Australia. The Biodynamic Association New Zealand is obviously a calendar that's based off of New Zealand's perspective. And the ephemeris is a book that details, it's an astrology resource that you can use if you know how to calculate the difference between signs and constellations, and that's the big hubbub. So I don't usually recommend people to start with an ephemeris to try to figure out, because the symbols are the same, so it's really going to throw you off, but the math isn't the same, which is a very interesting concept to wrap your head around, to understand that we're time and a calendar is one thing versus the physical, which is interesting because we're talking about a biodynamic calendar, which is a calendar which takes into account the physical. So
I guess I find it really fascinating that you're a biodynamic grower, but you're also an astrologer.
Yeah, I actually started with the astrology first, and then I grew food. What I didn't know was semi-biodynamically, but it made it really easy to understand where the timing was and that movement, I guess, from an astrology standpoint. If you're watching the stars, that clock, that calendar in the sky that's always moving, you watch it seasonally throughout the year. If we're again going back to that observation side of it, and from your place, you get accustomed to knowing that when that constellation, however you want to describe it, is in the sky, that these things happen. Oh, Matariki is here. Okay, that's usually a winter festival. It's harvest. It's downtime, soul searching, whatever influences you take from that, and you can be reflective into those. And then you see the summer triangle come up, and it's summer's on the horizon, and you can kind of, for me, get excited. Oh, you see a star you haven't seen in a while. Now you could stay up and see most of the stars in every night, but half the year you don't get to see them. So it's exciting. They're just little friends that pop out once in a while. It's like watching the birds return for me, or the hummingbirds, or anything back north, like or flowers show up, and you're sitting there and you start ticking the box, going, okay, it's time for those tulips to start blooming, and or the garlic's coming up, or you just those timings, those yearly timings, and how they correlate. Anyways, I got a little off there with the calendar.
Move on to the July page of the Astro calendar. Yeah.
So again, I guess before we get into that, I really do want to preface that, again, this all comes to what your project is, So for me, if I'm using a biodynamic calendar, I'm using it for the year. From a grower standpoint, I'm going to sit down with it, usually in winter when I get it, or and have the opportunity to, and plan out my year. And so that means across the board, for whatever scope I am. If I grow one thing, let's just focus on one thing. I'm going to grow this one thing. I'm going to have different needs for that season. Like we spoke about earlier, is it an annual plant? Do I need to sow seed? When do I need to sow seed? Do I need to transplant? When do I need to transplant? Is that 2 weeks after I sow seed? If I'm sowing seed that takes 6 weeks to germinate, I won't be sowing it for 2 months. I won't be doing my transplants. So again, it comes into knowing what we're talking, the individual that we're dealing with, right? So that's got to be your main focus, is understanding who you're dealing with before you ever pull out the calendar.
So like a lot of Aucklanders, for example, there's a certain degree of pride in tomatoes, like my tomatoes, I'm picking tomatoes, look at my tomato harvest. If we just look at the tomato crop, then you'd look at the whole year's calendar, decide when you're sowing seeds, when they need to be transplanted, when you're hoping to
harvest,
sort of fuss around with them, and plan the harvest and the crop that goes in after them. And also, I guess, the crop that's there before you put the tomatoes in.
Sure.
Yeah.
What else is there? You're missing two.
What?
Spray. What type of maintenance you're going to do?
Yeah.
And when I say spray is a nasty word, but spray doesn't. I could spray water. Water's not nasty. So, but how you're going to maintenance is the main thing. The maintenance schedule for whatever you're dealing with. You're going to need to maintain the soil as well, the living structures that also maintain that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final one that is the cleanup.
Yeah.
So if you take those concepts that we're talking about, sowing, transplanting, maintaining, harvesting, and cleanup, then I can build my calendar around those. So, okay, you go Auckland. I'm going to look to sow my seed. I want a good 8 weeks to 12 weeks before my transplant, depending on where I'm at, how much wind is going to be there, what type of plant I'm using.
Do you have a greenhouse or not?
A greenhouse, if you're doing them, indoor, outdoor, if you're going to plant them outdoor, all those things. But on a normal scale, we're probably looking at, somewhere now, really. I mean, you could start planting getting them going, I would think. Just depending, depending on Waiheke, I would have been planting my tomatoes probably now, have them ready to go in late August, into the ground, my first batch, because I want that. For what I was doing commercially was I wanted that first flush to have tomatoes ready to go, with my second flush actually going to be the ones I would put those in. I'd have them big and tall in the pots, nice, ready to go, transplant them, feed them heavy, get one, maybe two flushes of tomatoes, while the whole time I have other ones that I'm going to plant, growing them smaller into littler buckets. And then I'm going to put them underneath them while I'm harvesting. So I planted these ones, they're growing to harvest. These ones go in right after them. They're going, feeding them both. I take those ones off harvest. The second ones come up. Now I'm going to let those grow for the whole season and take multiple harvests off of those. But I got that initial first batch because the chefs wanted them early. So now that was something I was doing from a necessity, that was like, not from what the plants wanted, but for what my growing needs were. I would grow them that way. But from the home gardener, what are we waiting for? Auckland, June, August. Yeah, probably end of August, maybe, if you're looking to put them out in summer.
Yeah. I often feel like middle of August, come on, spring is nearly here. Let's just kind of get it all going. And we won't plant all the seeds now, but at least have the sensation that it's time to get seeds in.
Potatoes are one of those, though, that, you can keep them indoors for a long time. You can keep them in pots for a pretty good long time.
Okay.
In that crop sense. And they can be transplanted quite easily. You could cut them down and then let them respring up, and sort of thing. You could take cuttings off them. You grow one indoors, grow it up, and then just take a bunch of cuttings off of it, so you don't have to transplant, or you don't have to do 50 seedlings. You did one seedling, made a bunch of suckers off of it, and now you have all your plants.
That sounds like a fun project, actually.
Yeah, transplanting is always fun. Yeah. Making cuttings is fun.
Okay, so coming back to this calendar page here. So I do month by month planning because I don't have that commercial necessity of keeping chefs happy.
Sure, but you still need to plan your year kind of that way, in my opinion. So I mean, you can look at it month by month, and I would kind of encourage, I guess, your clients to, maybe at the beginning of the year, you might look at doing a year-long, just look around the calendar and then do a month-to-month sort of thing. Because if you're not
do like a year and then a season and then a month and then a week and then today.
Sure.
So they're different lenses to look through, aren't there?
Exactly. If you're constantly just looking at the 1 month, what do I have this month? Your forethought isn't to the end of the season. I'm almost thinking of next, I'm already thinking next season. Like I'm on to the next year where I'm at. So to look at what this month is, hopefully I've already delineated what I need to do this month if I'm in July, and it's on my calendar and I planned it. It's not, I look at it as a tool that's not in the moment, it's used for planning. So I'm like, oh, okay, July, I'm hoping to have
the world. We turn the page in July, 1st of July, and we've got like along here a bunch of tasks of when we've intended to do a few things within the context of the year. Yeah,
exactly. And the reason I like that, I guess, is because it gives me benchmarks to try to keep myself to, and I can look at the beginning of the year and say, okay, when's my best time to make compost? When's my best time to plant these seedlings? When's my best time to transplant? When's my best time to spray? And I can write those down and try to make a plan. Now, that always doesn't come to fruition, but it gives me some structure. It gives me some bones through the season, some ideal timings to be aware of, but also, subconsciously aware of too. Like if you're planning these things, you're getting into a flow, into a movement of trying to work within that rhythm, right? And that's what you're trying to look for in that biodynamics, is working within rhythm. So why not plan more than, if I was to just jump on July, then I'd just be like, oh, what do I got to do this month? But if I had looked at it in January, or I'm planning July now for the rest of the season, from our perspective, this would be the time I'd sit down with the whole calendar and look at what crops. And depending on the size and scale of, a home gardener might have 60 to 200 different plants on their property, depending on what they got, that they're building this out. And each one of them has specifics. I need to go, if I got peach trees up in Auckland, I need to get my, some sort of spray on. Well, I need to be aware of diseases at this point. I need to be aware of disease pressure at this point. I need to be aware of when I might have, anyways. So I guess another one I can look at is I try to find pressure points too, like in growing seasons where I might have irregulars in the biodynamic calendar that, well,
Should I look at there's the biodynamic calendar there.
but more in the growing season sort of thing. Like if I see a bunch of Earth day or water days around a full moon and whatnot, I might be thinking I'm going to get some moisture then. Well, is that going to be around a hot part of the year? Okay, well, I'm going to get mildew pressure then. And if I'm going to get mildew pressure, then I'm going to want to get a 507 spray on probably the week before that or the couple days before that. So, I look at that sort of thing, thinking, around water and full moon, is definitely, if I'm planning, going, oh, look at this. Oh, right. That's on a fire day. Moon days on fire days, I don't get as much water sometimes. So
in July, there's the full moon there, and the fire, the earth sign.
Fruit moving into root.
Yeah.
Yep.
So where would you see pressure points here?
Oh, so we got full moon coming up here in the 13th there. With a node past it. I mean, we're going to get water, but again, seasonally, that's not a bad thing for right now. Like, I guess that would be what would be a task right now that if I was to get water, like, say I had a bunch of material that I didn't want to get, saturated. I would be making sure that I put it on my to-do list that before the 13th or maybe the 12th, maybe even the 11th with that node there, the 10th, that I would probably be thinking that there might be some weather patterns coming in there, and making sure that I've taken care of some responsibilities before that. Did I check my guttering systems? Did I check the drains off my roof? A few weeks ago we had a nice little snow down here, and then it rained, and all my guttering off of the greenhouses got blocked because we have poplar trees beside us, and it's not fun sticking your hand up a frozen hole that's draining water all over you in the middle of winter, where I should have took care of that task a couple days before and cleaned my gutters and thinking we were having some weather. So it's just planning. I mean, and that's what the calendar is there for, is that planning. So
do you want to say anything about moon opposite Saturn? It's twice in July. Once here on the just coming into that waxing, and then here just after the new moon.
Yeah, it's kind of almost like a blue moon sort of situation. That's probably because I would look at Saturn. I wonder if it was in retrograde at some point, because that would be moving itself backwards, which is going to close the window. Because again, if you think monthly, it's going around the whole time, so it should happen about the same, 28 and a half days, kind of like the full moon.
It says here Saturn's retrograde all month.
Yeah, so it's moving backwards. That's why we're getting it twice in 1 month.
Okay.
That makes sense? Why would that? Yeah. So again, for your viewers, like 28 and a half days, whatnot, for the moon cycle. So you do get that blue moon, which is 2 moons in a month. And if you so as that goes around, conjunct, opposite, square, whatever those aspects are, those hit at certain points. Now we're talking about 2 moving objects. So they happen, Saturn's outer planet, so it's moving slower versus, say, Mercury, which would, is moving much more quickly and spontaneously. So it should happen regularly, monthly, that we have a opposition Saturn. And being that from our perspective, it seems that Saturn is retrograding or moving backwards in our sky, that then the moon catches up to it quicker. Hence, we get to Saturn.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. What about nodes? How much do you recommend resting on a node day?
I would say, again, to the individual, it's an awareness thing. Like, nodes are kind of a shift, right? So you're kind of hitting the end of kind of the end of the ascension descension. Like it's not the full thing, but it's right before it's going to dip, right? So you're coming to almost the culmination of a process, right? Which that doesn't seem like a bad idea to rest. You should, if you've gotten all your work done, it is kind of that rest and go, oh, we got all that good. Now let's enjoy this next little bit, and then we'll move through.
I think of it like a swing. You know, when you're on a swing in a playground, you go forwards and then backwards, and that point where you're neither forwards or backwards.
Yep,
would you answer a phone call at that moment in time? Probably not. It's like,
yep,
where are we going? Yeah.
Now, some people, again, we're talking about somewhat energetic forces here. So if you find that you work well on those days, you know, there's nothing wrong. Like, don't take it as gospel. Just observe and go, hey, make a note. Man, I couldn't do anything today. All right, you wrote that down. Oh, it was a no day. Get to the next one. I couldn't. This was just an awful day. Wrote it down. Oh, it was a no day. You know, after 4 times, I'm going to be like, well, hell, I'm going to stop doing that on no days because it just ain't working.
How do you find it commercially? Do you build any variance into the pace that you work at?
By implementing a biodynamic practice into calendar? Oh, I wouldn't.
Like if you notice it's a node day, will you still carry out all the normal tasks, or will you shift things by a day here and there?
The normal task, as in a normal task for me would be like harvesting, right? So if harvesting, I can't shift it. Like commercially, that is my harvest day. My, you know, everyone orders that day. That's the day I do it. So I can't shift that. Can I shift when I'm gonna, you know, do maintenance or spray or irrigate or transplant or some of those things? Yeah, maybe I can, you know, I can move those to be more optimal. From my current situation in the hydroponic system, no, you know, that doesn't make too much difference because I'm just going to put that, you know, I just got to fill holes to some degree. And if I don't fill the hole and I leave it on the, you know, in a tray instead of put it there, like it hasn't made much difference in that plant. I wouldn't think. But if we go back to the idea of, you know, disruptions and just chaos to some degree on those days and just being mindfulness of the change, then, you know, then that's kind of to the individual, I guess. You know, if you're able to work within that chaos and feel safe there, then why not?
Cool. What else? Composting generally happens on descending moon periods, but it doesn't have to. Like what in your view for the home gardener or the lifestyle block owner, would you coordinate composting in alignment with the moon?
Oh, I definitely would. I would hope to. I'd plan it out, you know, my year to say, okay, Auckland, let's say we're gonna start composting in, I mean, are you making a new pile? Like, depends on what you're doing, I guess, too. Again, that's why it always comes back to the task at hand, right? Like, excuse me there. If I'm working on, say I was working on a big commercial, you know, vineyard, whatnot, then I'm going to take all my cane, all my mark, all my, you know, prunings and cuttings and weeds from the year. And I'm going to make one compost really per season. I'm not making multiple compost. If I'm a home composter, you love making compost. So you can make compost any month of the year. It doesn't really matter. You know, there's, to some degree, there are seasonal influences, yearly influences that can make change. And I'm hoping that you're taking some good notes on the different composts you make and where they were in the years and the months and those type of things. So you say, oh, well, my summer compost just never works on this site. Well, stop making summer compost then, you know, save yourself the time as well. It's not, why fight a losing battle to some degree? If your winter compost is really good, which usually is, then just make it in the winter. But that means you have material sitting around all year and have to figure out how you're going to deal with those type of things. So compost again it's necessity to what the task is. You know,
Mm.
if I'm in a place that creates a lot of waste, like I create a ton of waste here. Like we have lots of, every day we're pulling out roots, we're pulling out cut plants. You know, I put it in a row. I let that row sit there for the season, and then at the end of the year, I turn it, build compost out of it. You know, so I have a big windrow sitting out here for
Mhm.
this next spring that I'll put out into the beds and feed everything with.
Mm.
So I'm taking all of last year's material that was there and feeding it back to the ground. Right
Yeah.
now, I can do that once a year. I use a big machine to turn it all over, and that saves the time and the energy and the body. You know, again, we're talking about scale. I'm working at this scale. Some people might be just working with one wheelbarrow or, you know, sort of situation scale.
Yeah.
All of it's the same. You just got to figure out how to mitigate that waste, you know, and what you're trying to achieve out of that. You know, are you trying to achieve a really nice soil that you can then feed something else? Are you just trying to get rid of waste? Are you just trying to?
A lot of the people I work with are inspired by the potential to never have to buy potting mix and compost in a bag ever again. Like to make everything, to grow seedlings, to pot them on, to have potting mix that, you know, has everything the plant needs, and to have some for the entire garden as well.
Okay, well, compost is going to be a percentage of that material then, right?
Yeah.
Like, so then you're going to need your base material to add into your compost. Are you turning the compost in? Are you making up new soil there? Again, I can, depending on who the person, the client is, you can go in many different ways, and they all have different needs. But
yeah, and it depends what the soil needs, where they are, and what they're trying to grow, and yeah.
so if you're trying to make that good, you know, that really enlivened, you know, kind of rich compost, you know, my personal opinion then would be, you know, to work within that seasonal descending yearly, working into winter, through winter into spring, traditional kind of composting making season, being that those the living, it's so much easier to keep more life in that compost because it doesn't dry out and get too hot or too much wind. Usually, you know, it just kind of bunkers itself in. Summer compost is a lot more well, not a lot, again, scale. It just, if my scale, it's a lot more work because I got to water them, I got to turn them, I got to keep them from drying out. You know, you got to make sure that the birds don't scratch all off. Do you get weeds in them that you need to pull out so you're not losing all that good stuff? Is it covered enough that the water isn't seeping into it and that it's, you know, just losing all that good liquid is just seeping down into someplace else? So there's things you need to consider, and you got to consider those in winter as well. But yeah, it just, if I was doing compost in that scenario, I was looking to grow soil, because I'm going to add compost in a seedling situation. It's more of a feed for me. You know, I'm using it as a feed and revitalizing versus a necessary, a fundamental component to what the soil medium would be.
Okay.
So the soil medium is going to be sand, you know, dirt, stick, leaf, and then a little bit of, you know, compost sort of thing. And it's the life that's within that breaking down, the bugs and whatnot, bacteria and fungi that are breaking down that material there. If I just throw compost, there's nothing really left to break down. You got to start feeding it. So if you're just using it as a top dressing, or if you're trying to build soil, if you're putting in trays, like I wouldn't do like seedling trays and compost. But
no. Yeah, I'm shifting quite dramatically how I like grow at the moment. I'm getting used to this pukekohe soil, because where I was in Titirangi was clay, that I needed the compost just to soften it. Yeah. And I don't need it anymore. That now it's just managing waste. That it's like, really?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, different needs. Again, then that's the site, right? That's being, you know, each site's different. So you got to understand what your needs are. You know, you might move to a different site that you don't have all that waste. You know, you don't have a giant maple tree in the yard that has to, you know, that sheds its leaves every year that you need to clean up, or you know, could use. You don't have to clean up, but it's useful material. Yeah. Or wherever you're at, you know. if you got a bunch of gorse again, you could be chipping that all up, turning it into a nice little high nitrogen, high heat fertilizer, putting that into your compost pile and shooting your temperature up, killing off what you need in there, and then putting it back on. So you've taken something that was a huge pain in the butt. Yeah, it took you a little bit of a trouble to get it out of your field. You sawed it off, you threw it through the chipper, cost you a few $100 to, if you went that way, to rent that machinery or whatever you did with a group. But now you have this high-end material, and it's done a really good job of heating your compost to get to the activity you want to create a desirable outcome. And now you've used that to put it back on the soil and feed what you have out there, and the negatives become positive. It's that little story that weeds are, that light on the system where they're just trying to do their job.
Just part of the system, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah, and useful.
Oh,
So back to, but the calendar again. Yeah. So for me, it's really knowing what your tasks are. So then I'm setting up that year. I'm writing in my calendar, so I'm giving myself notes and then checking in on it, and not being judgmental on myself to say, oh, I didn't get that done. Oh, okay. Not, and it's not usually, another thing is I don't just try to make it up either. It's like, oh, I didn't get that done here, so I'm going to rush to get it done now. Is that optimal? It might not be. If I rush again and say I put a spray on or something right before because it's at the end of this cycle, I was going to get it done 3 days ago, I didn't get it done, and now I'm here at the end of the cycle and I want to get it on, but I'm right up against a full moon I know it's gonna wash it all off. Like, what did I do? Oh, I did it, so I can check my little box. Oh, yep, I sprayed that, but I didn't get the benefits of what I was actually trying to do. So it might behoove me more to just look at my calendar and go, when's the next optimal place? Next week. All right, well, apologies there. Yeah, so having that little bit of compassion for the self too. I personally like structure, so I like to have define things and say, okay, this is when I need to have that done, this is when I have that done, that, and I am a task ticker. That's done, that's done, that's done. Some people are more of a free flowing situation where they want to meander, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you're going from thing to thing, and
yeah, for the meanderers, like I've had some people say, the moon calendar guide's really useful and all, but to be honest, I'm doing well if I get out in the garden at all. But people like that don't want to pick up a calendar and go, oh, I can't do what I felt like doing today.
Sure.
That doing something's better than nothing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So to those people, what I would say is observe them. Do what you do on those days, but make note. Take the information that you are given. You're doing the task. You've done it on this day. Record that information. That is useful, in my opinion. It's useful information. If it's a task you're going to repeat, something you're going to do all the time, why not keep a log of it so that you can kind of have answers? You're not going to remember the last time you turned your compost and what it was like. You might remember the first time, but was it actually 35 degrees or was it 32 degrees? What was the moisture content in June? I thought it was all right. Oh, was it? Oh, wait, look. Oh no, it was really bad. I forgot I wrote that down. Like those things, we just forget about them. So
we certainly do.
If that's the way you can use the tool, then that's the way it's a good way. It's still a good way to use the tool. It gives you some sort of, I don't want to say it's just like a placebo effect. It's not. It gives you something to connect to in the stars in that way, and then you can say, okay, well, I might get excited. Oh, I know that every time I do this on an ascending Leo day, that it's come out really good. I get really good germination on this day. Oh, all right, well, then I might get really excited for that. And those people might go, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna circle that day, and I've used my past experiences to teach me something. And I'm going to use that information to try to do what I do better, or I can just keep doing the same thing over and over. And again, no judgment to that. That's it's their own way of doing it. But that would be
Yeah.
how I would say with the meandering. If you don't want to use the calendar as this is here, this here, kind of in a calendar sense, like
Then use it in a diary sense as a record to look back and reflect if you choose to later.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Yeah. And to give yourself, the ability to, because the funny thing with all this is that we're talking about a calendar that's never the same. We'll never see the calendar the same way again in our life, ever. Every day is a different day. They're, Venus, Mercury, they might come back to the same spots. The Pluto won't be in the same spot. That influence won't be the same. That one, we're going to get some influences that are going to be something that we felt before, but they'll never be the exact same essence.
So we're like in astrological stuff, every now and then we hear the big news that, these two planets in this conjunction, it only happens every 120 years. It's a special day. Every day is a unique.
Yeah. Every day is a unique one. Yeah. I laugh at all that stuff a lot of time because it's a great way to hype up people looking at the sky. I like people taking account of what's above them because it's I don't know, I find it amazing. So I enjoy staring up at it. I look at it. I'm a 4 a.m. up and goer, so I'm up before the sun every day. I see the stars every morning. I see this in this time of the year. I see the stars every night. So you get to have a lot of more connection to them this time of year than say summertime. But I still see them in the summer. So what are we dealing with right now? We got 5 planets, that you can see in the morning sky, and they're all aligned with the moon. Someone sent me some Instagram thing the other day. Oh, make sure you get up and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I think it was from the Biodynamic Association of the States, maybe it was. And I just laughed because it already happened. Oh no, that's what it was. New Zealand radio. I don't remember which one, but we got the radio on in the greenhouses, and the guy was talking about this alignment at like noon. I'm like, it's already happened. He's talking about it's already happened. I'm just like, but he had no clue. He was saying, "Oh, make sure to look at the conjunction, and you'll see it tonight." And I'm like, "They're morning stars. You can't see Venus at night, dude." He's like, "Oh yeah, take a look tonight." I'm like, "No, you can't see it tonight." But he had no clue. Just blind ignorance to it. But don't get me wrong. Those things I've been awed by the stars many times, like not just themselves, but those once in a lifetime moments. That Jupiter Saturn conjunction we had a few months back, almost a year ago, sort of thing. Now, it's something. Yeah, you'll see it, but you only get to see it every 30 years or something like that, right? So it's one of those like, wow, okay, today's something I might not get to see again. I don't know. I just find that entertaining. Or I went to Hawaii once to go watch Mercury or Venus transit the sun, and it won't happen again for, I think it's another 126 years from that date. So we're probably 115 years away. It's like, oh well, I got to see it, and it's like the ultimate pay-per-view for me. Like, like you get, here's your calendar, set your date. There's your tour schedule. All right, we're going to be the big stars. Oh, that's a big star. That's a big day. That's a cool day. Yeah, there's an eclipse. And I can find my fun things in the year through the calendar as well. Conjunction squares and all those things like that. I think that's a part of the calendar that isn't investigated enough. And I think, again, to my previous comment, that every day is a different day is the reason. Like, we just don't have hundreds and hundreds of years of data to tell us, the influences of what the outer planets really, show to us, and if we had that data, maybe we'd be able to understand that, seasonal patterns to some degree as well, maybe are repeated from a conjunction. I remember back to early 2008 through 10 maybe. We kept having this Aquarius square Pluto situation, right? They were just sitting here doing this thing. Now we're talking about two outside planets again, or Uranus and Pluto square, right? Two outer planets move very slowly, and they would go retrograde and non-retrograde. So they were just crossing each other. And I think they crossed each other like 7 times or 8 times through that span. If you went back and looked at, almost each time they touched was a natural catastrophe. We had the tsunami in Indonesia on the day. We had the earthquake in Iceland on the day. And yeah, you could go and say, oh, they're just days that happen. But after 7 of them, each one, you look at it and go, oh crap, next time this happens, I might just be aware that something could happen. Again, it's not going to stop me from going to the mountain or going to the beach or whatever, but I might be more aware of it. And that's the thing. Awareness, observation, and how you can.
Yeah. I heard someone describe how they work with a calendar the other day, that recording the tasks and the seasonal changes and what you harvest and what you plant and when you do it and the weather patterns and nature patterns, that actually becomes a biography of a sort.
Yeah, definitely. It's a story.
Yeah. And I think I've never taken notes with the intention of it being that sort of a record.
Yeah.
But that's a cool project for anyone watching that's maybe artistic or wants to use beautiful stationery or set things out in a certain way that they can look back on and think of future generations using it as a tool.
Sure.
Yeah.
You can deep dive, when you start looking at it, because we're talking about 13 moving obstacles here that are in constant motion, right? So
yeah.
Yeah, so you just have the ability to I don't know, get pretty heady with it if you need to. But I mean, a lot of people use it from a general task situation. They're trying to go, okay, this influence is here. I should be working in the soil. I should be transplanting. I should be doing these things. And yes, those are all, they're semi-generalized to some degree. We're getting into this habit that we just assume that a descending period on in a descending period here is the same as a descending period there, and each year is the same. I'm interested. Can you pull up that calendar for either one, Brian's or Dynamic Association one? Perfect. I'm just wondering, because if we're looking at like descending root days, so now this year, if I'm looking at it, we only have the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th sort of thing, right? Kind of turns over on the 8th.
Yeah, these are ascending.
Oh yeah, you're right, ascending. So we're moving to the other side. So we're looking at the 23rd, 4th, 5th, and a little bit there at the beginning, right? So he's going to say the 15th, 16th. Probably wouldn't do anything on the 14th. But we're still kind of in this pattern of 2 roots in a descending period.
Mm-hmm.
And that should change over time. Hypothetically, it should rotate itself out. So you would have, you'll get to years where they have 2 fruit days or 2, and so those years I kind of look and go, oh, okay, well, maybe this is again, if we're taking a 10-year look at our property versus say the 1-year look, when am I going to do does that mean that year has extra influence in the root side of it? Like the descending root is heavier that year? Should I be doing more work on putting in a new orchard then, like versus a year that has 2 flower days on it through the winter, and sometimes that'll change into the summer too. So like, oh, if I'm if I'm harvesting and whatnot, maybe I'm getting 2 flower days every ascending, and I'm getting a double pick that year, or I might be getting more blossoms that season because of, you know, that influence that's coming out there. So again, noting that and saying, oh, what's different?
So much to think about and contemplate, and then observe after the fact.
And that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So where do we, again, the old cliche is the 3-step process is cerebral, think, dream, imagine, right? Step 2 is put into action, do. Get out there, physical, do the action or the dream. 3, how did the dream work? Contemplate, reflect, replan. Now you're back to step 1. And that's living with the project, right? That's being part of it. So.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, because then you have, like I said, there's so much more depth in there to go, okay, does Jupiter, again, I'm using things that are visible for us. So Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, Mars are the 4 most commonly seen planets in our solar system, right, in our night sky. Mercury is seen as well, but it's usually a horizon situation. So many people that live in, like myself, in a mountainous climate that can't see the horizon, I don't see Mercury very often. You'd have to get up high in the sky to get a view of it, right? So, you know, those things, yes, there's an influence there, but what is that direct visual influence from me? Again, you know, if I'm looking at the stars, those are the ones I see. So going back to our early conversation about 4 stars in line the other day, where we had the moon and Jupiter and Venus and Mars out there in the morning, like, you can see them. And so, you know, you build that relationship with them much easier than, say, Uranus and Pluto or whatnot. And that's why the moon, again, that relationship is something that's always changing. It's got actual flow to it, which is almost easier to pay attention to than just Venus going up to its apex. Like, I think this was it's a whole much more. There's 3 phases of Venus's movements, right? And there's one where she gets really high up in the morning sky. I think it's the Rapunzel one, but she gets up to about 22 degrees or so. She can only get away from the sun so far. She's being that she's an internal planet to us, our visual capacity only allows her to be within that many degrees of the sun before she has to come back to it. Okay. And that's what we were just out of. So, you know, she got really high up in the sky with Jupiter up there, and then Jupiter didn't move really, but he's slow. But Mars has went past. They were conjunct. Venus has dropped off, and this just dance is going on in front of us all the time. And it is in paper there, but those influences aren't showed up as much as we're looking at the moon here. We're just focusing on the moon, where I still feel like that's the seasonal. Those are just the seasonal influences as the moon is to me, you know, like those aspects are something.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about the visibility of the moon in the daytime, and something that parents can do with children to, like, observe it getting bigger and then smaller, and observe the different times of the day it can be seen in the sky, and observe how high it gets in the sky? Like, how old were you when you started noticing the moon? Do you remember?
No, I have no idea. I haven't. Yeah, we used to get out the telescope and look at the moon all the time, so it was pretty young. But probably maybe at the beginning of the astrology stuff, that I really started really fine-tuning, like, when things were moving into different, you know, phases and stuff like that. I've really been enjoying some of the concept down here, the new moon calendars from what's the professor's name out of Auckland there?
Oh, the Living by the Stars?
Yeah, Living by the Stars gentleman. I got his name, but I can't think of it. Anyway, but his stuff I'm really into. I mean, for me, it's something new. It's someone else's interpretation or another culture's interpretation on something that we all see, and the movement of that and how that's influenced their lives, and the seasonal aspects of that. You know, like, I went to one of his talks, and he was just he's kind of scolding the people there for not knowing the seasonal. When do the eels come back? When do the shorebirds show up? And one of those signs, like, are you connected to what's going on around you? And
Yeah.
and that's the moon's.
So one of the things he talked about how like if the days of the week and the names of the months of the year, it's all this Gregorian calendar is colonization.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's kind of
It's a tool, but it's
mind blowing.
It's indoctrination. Yeah.
If our natural clock is the cosmos, then yeah, that.
And it kind of fits within it, so it's it works for the system to some degree, but it's not the tried true sort of thing. And something like something I like about the concept of Matariki is that it's site specific too. Like it isn't like we celebrated it this year on one day, but that's not the way it is. Like it's seasonal, so the people on the West Coast would get a different day because they need to see the horizon line, and until those horizon lines are happening, that's what you're working on. But back to the moon and just following it, I guess if you're working with children or adults or anybody that wants to feel more connected to it, it's like I think one of the easiest is finding a window. If you have a window that you can see north and can see the moon sort of thing, then find a window that you can get some dry erase markers out and track it. Draw a circle, or a line, follow it. Like it comes off the window, it ain't gonna hurt it. Like it gives you the ability to see what's going on in your horizon and to really grasp. If you were to do that if everybody went out there and did that now for the month and tracked it and were able to leave that there till December and then did it again, it'd blow your mind how far off those lines are. Like to see how much tilt, wobble, and sway and how much movement we have as a planet, and that's what we're dealing with there. It's not the person moving, it's the planet moving. Like it's intriguing to me. I like the magic of it. I like the magic.
Cool. I don't have any other questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What else I have? The calendar. What else can you use the calendar for? So it tells you what we're talking about. So again, like let's go into like sprays and stuff. So the basics were like transplanting and things like that. So sprays, if we're talking about sprays, let's define that. So usually a spray is something that's used to feed or to control something. Yeah. Well, it's usually to protect, control. There's another word I'm looking for there. Kind of dispel things. So
shield, prevent.
Yeah, maybe prevent. It's closer to the word I'm looking for. But break the patterns, right? So when we're talking about disease and stuff, what we're trying to do is trying to break that pattern. Like either break it at the beginning, hopefully, so that you don't have to go through it. Break it at the middle, so you can stop what's going on, or break at the end, which is basically just trying to get whatever last remnants of food you can off that plant. Sort of usually like
intervention.
Yeah, intervention. Yeah, I haven't got it yet, but so let's go.
A lot of people think spray free is the ideal. Like if a grower is spray free, then they're probably organic. But we're talking about sprays that are natural materials.
Exactly. Terminology here. So spray is one of those words that gets manipulated and can have a negative connotation to it. Biodynamically, sprays are great, right? We're putting on sprays all the time, trying to strengthen and and build nutrients and food in a living structure. So there's nothing wrong with spraying 501 or spraying 500 or
507 or 508. I'm curious about 508. I think it hasn't been talked about for home gardeners.
Okay.
It's equisetum.
Yep.
Yeah.
The biggest part probably is in this country is just the availability to it. Like back home in Oregon, it grows everywhere. So I can get horsetail right off the ground.
Get horsetail loose leaf tea in the organic shop.
Oh, perfect. You can. All right. Yeah. They'll sell it to you dried, I guess.
Yeah.
Biodynamically, not my tea, because I wanted it from a living plant. But I think, you got to deal with what you can deal with, Anywho, it's a good tool and an easy way to get into. Again, spraying is not a bad thing. So if you're just doing this, tomatoes, we were talking about tomatoes. So equisetum spray would be great for mildew pressure in tomatoes. Tomatoes usually get a lot of powdery mildew, so it works well for that, right? Equisetum in that point is great then. So before your full moon, probably if you can find a ascending period before the full moon, that would be lovely. If it's after the full moon, then that'd be fine as well. Just again, that's when your moisture pressure is going to happen usually, when you're going to have water.
So I know this is July, but if it were tomato season.
Sure. So if I'm looking at that, then I'm looking at say, probably that 9th, 10th.
So it's like ascending, coming up to the full moon. This is where you're going to get more moisture, and you want to protect the plant at this point when it's likely to get that fungal activity happening.
And flowers right before water usually, right? Leaf days.
Flower day, leaf day, right? Okay, so you're spraying the equisetum on a watery day, on a flower day where possible.
I'd be putting it on the flower day. Yeah.
Why?
Again, protecting, because it's on the exterior of the plant. You could, yeah, it's a warmer day, I guess. My pressure, my water pressure is probably going to be more from those leaf days, and so I'm trying to get ahead of it. So that's why I'm going to go on the flower day.
Yep.
So I'm going to get my equisetum on then. That way, any mildew pressure that wants to start at that watery leaf day is disrupted. Trying to break that cycle, and then I don't get that mildew pressure.
Okay, so then later in the month, ignoring that this is July and not tomato growing season, but we've got an ascending period here. There's some leafy days, there's some airy days, but because it's a new moon, it's a totally different situation to this. Sure,
but depending on how my plants are looking and whatnot, I'm coming up to a leaf day. That's still going to denote to me some sort of water. It doesn't have to be rain. It can be in the plant too, right? It's just the aspects of kind of, again, summary in this, we're depending on where you're at, you just are aware of that pressure. And if you're not getting any pressure, you're not seeing any yellow, black checkered ladybirds that are telling you that you have mildew pressure, then, you can maybe, it's not as important. But or some people like to just, it's 2 weeks, I spray, every 2 weeks I get it on there just to make sure that I don't get any pressure later and have to have a bigger problem on my hands. Okay. So they might be, I might be spraying again right after the full moon there, or the new moon, I might be doing that 27th, probably the 27th, if I was circling a day, would be the day I'd be trying to do it. Mm-hmm. Not, it's not ideal, but somewhere in the 27th, maybe even early morning 28th. As I'm transitioning there, I'm just getting something on. We're talking about a benign substance. Well, I'm not going to say that. That's because that takes away the magic. We're talking about, a substance that doesn't have a lot of negative effect, in my opinion. Like, you're not really going to change your flavor profile. You're not poisoning. You're not, it's a natural, somewhat product. It's not a heavy metal that you're going to build up and have toxicity from. Horsetail is ecosystem is silica. Silica is the most common compound found on the planet. So it's around. It's you know what I mean. So it's pretty non-hazardous. I'll put it that way. So spraying it liberally and making it up and spraying it liberally isn't going to hurt you too badly. And that's a lot of the biodynamic product preparations are, 500, 501 or sort of that same way. Like, have a play. Like, you don't have to be as dogmatic about it, but understand that what you're doing has influences. So, understanding those influences is the hardest part of this whole game, and understanding biodynamics to some degree. But have, it's not going to hurt you to put that extra ecosystem. And ecosystem is a fun one because it's an open air ferment. Like, you just cut the stuff, you boil some water, some rainwater, pour it over the top of it, kind of ferment it for a couple of days, stir it up, and you get this nice frothy tea. The gentleman I worked for at Hirsch Vineyards in California, he'd drink it every day. I mean, it's silica tea. He loved it. I make up these giant barrels of this stuff and let it, set a couple days in the ecosystem, and it turns just golden brown, like, beer almost, and smells really intense. But yeah, you get open air that, you get this nice lathery bubble, which tells you got action, and then you're spraying that over that, and that action, that chemical reaction is, starting some sort of bacterial reaction, and everything's going to eat something. So you're knocking this down, and some fungi or it's going to be bacteria in this state, it's going to show up to help, and that's going to help it's going to disrupt the powderies process. And that's what we're not having to take anything away. We're just breaking processes. And any pest, and that's from living pests to plant pests to, it's about breaking processes to some degree. You don't have to be as destructive as possible. You just need to understand how to break a process.
And what about the sprays that are feeding? And I've seen a little bit of stuff come through social media about the price of fertilizers skyrocketing. The horticulture is about to change, and I reckon it could change for the better if more people are going, shit, can't afford that commercial stuff. What can I use that's naturally? They'll find biodynamics, and then suddenly there's this whole world of options.
Yeah, I mean, compost tea is one of the most useful things I think of, like, especially if you're brewing your own compost, like, save a little bit up. Liquid, making liquid fertilizer around your plants is, a good way to increase the availability of nutrients in the soil, especially stirred. Again, changing the balance of water from a positive to a negative ion in that sense allows for the uptake of more of those nutrients into the plant. So stirring your compost tea and enlivening your water will help with that as well. So if I take all my compost for the year, I put 75% of it on the ground, in my beds, under my trees, under wherever I'm going to put it, and I feed there. Well, that's available to anybody then, right? That's any grass any weed, any little bug, which isn't a negative. They're all feeding back into the system as well, but it's dissipated. And so if I'm coming back to my tomatoes and I want to give them a little joy, I could put a little bit more around the plant, or I could take liquid and get it to the root zone, right? Now, the compost and the living side of it is, in that sense, going to start bacteria again. Say I have nematodes and I've got this living compost that has all this life form in it, right? And I put that in water and I stir that all up and I take some of that life dies. Well, what happens to dead life is other bacteria show up to eat that, which then starts the building process again. So that I'm taking all that, putting it down in the soil. And as those bacteria, which are the things that are actually feeding the plant, is the symbiotic relationship between the bugs, the bacteria, and the plant. Not so much the plant just doesn't take up nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium out of the soil. It needs to bond that, which is usually through the wee and shit from the bugs, right? And then it's a symbiotic relationship of those two processes, not just raw materials. So I put all that stuff on the ground, and then the liquid fertilizer is more accessible at that root state. And I'll get, and then I get a little joint for my plants.
Mhm. Is compost tea similar to CPP?
Similar. I mean, what is CPP? How would they be different?
Well, the CPP being made from just cow manure
Sure.
makes it different. And then the greater presence of the compost preparations makes it different.
I guess if you're using biodynamic compost that already has preparation in it, then they're going to be a little bit more similar than
there are some batches of biodynamic compost I've made that are so crumbly and soft and silky smooth that I can't feel much difference between the compost and CPP.
Yeah. But that's, not all compost is that way though, I guess.
True.
So depending on the type of compost you have and the materials you use to make that compost, CPP could be, it's again going to have a lot. Think of it as like a biological kind of bomb going off. You're taking, if we can put, what is it, like a billion microorganisms live on in dirt the size of your thumb or something like that, I think the number is, or whatever they tout that number, and often taking a spoonful of CPP, it's got billions and billions of life in it, right? So we're putting all that out there and trying to explode the life cycle and kickstart that. So if your compost is not living and it's in a dead state, whatnot, then you're not getting that. Making a compost tea out of a dead tea, it doesn't have the same effects, right? Because you're not actually taking the living organisms and dispersing them across your property. You're just taking the raw materials and still needing to enliven them, which is going to happen in the soil by taking that compost tea and putting it out there, but putting a little bit of CPP with some living in there is going to fasten that, make that process faster.
Yeah.
Cool. That's the whole reason you want living situation. If it's living, then you're creating, versus stagnant compost is going to be, or I wouldn't say dead, because it's not ever dead. It's just stagnant. So that can be enlivened. It's just in a stagnant situation. So adding CPP to that would help. So if I was making compost tea, I'd probably put some CPP tea in there, and help that along.
Cool.
Seaweed, classic one. People love to make seaweed tea. My only thing with seaweed tea I would put out there is know what seaweed you're using. There's a lot of different ones out there. Be aware of any type of bugs that might be coming with it from the beach and stuff like that. Seaweed on the beach is a place for bugs to live. That's, if it was actually left there, you would have bugs breaking that down and doing their job there. It's high in vitamins. It's a really good thing from kelp. So you're getting the vitamin side of things that you don't get a lot of in, well, depending again on what your compost is made of. If you have a lot of diversity in your compost, then you probably don't need as much. You're getting it from other things. But kelp's a common one. Fish emulsion, you have a lot of people that use fish emulsion as a liquid fertilizer. These are all organic. Now they all can be done, organic is a term, but still know what you're doing. So if you're taking fishes, ground up fish, right? So I don't want to buy fish emulsion from somebody that's gill netting, a company that turns around and is hurting the ocean or doing harm, and I'm getting a product off of it. If it's, fish emulsion from I got a friend Rick that goes out fishing, and I take all the heads off of his fish and I chop those up and I put them in my thing. See the difference? Like so it's still being aware of how these materials come to you. I think is a big part of our society. You're full on to the whole idea of, why are we composting? Why are we trying to create these closed loop systems that are more healing versus wasteful?
Yeah, and I've gone deep dive into the Huapara Kore.
No.
It's the it's not new, it's 20 years old, but it's been revived. Maori organic verification. So it's a community verification process, and one of the principles is whakapapa, where you just like you can trace your ancestry. You want to trace every element that comes into your property and know exactly what's coming in. And they don't use the term organic. They talk about kai atua, or pure food. Like atua is star, so food, cosmic, like pure food.
That's what it is. It's cosmic food.
Yeah.
All it is. Yeah, no, that's a cool concept. I'm not aware of that. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's good.
So for a Huapara Kore grower, Maori grower, then where the fish heads are coming from is hugely important.
Yep. Freshwater, saltwater, north, south, type of fish.
Who was fishing?
Who was fishing? What did it eat? Like where did you get it out of the I love driving by Twizel and everyone's fishing off the salmon farm there, and you're just like, man, they're just feeding that stuff just crap. Like that's not actual fish. Like, well, I mean it is, but at the same time, it's not the same as the one over in the ocean. It's eating different things. They're just different. So being aware of the differences, again, with non-judgmental, it's just different, and you need to be aware of the differences. There was, I think, I didn't attend the biodynamic conference, but I think there was something about preparations, using different sheets. There's always a conversation about, can the preparations be done with different materials in different ways? And I always say yes, like you can do them differently. Hold one second. Yes, you can do them differently, but be aware of the difference. Steiner did a great job of explaining the shape of the animal, like if you're talking about ungulates and the head, the back, the rear, the moon, where they're connected to in these things, which is another conversation. But you can observe them. And so if I'm going to use this material versus that material, I hope you understand why you're doing that. I mean, and then observing it. If you're going to use, classic one down here is using pine, Casuarina pines versus Echinacea for making 508. Speaking of, we were talking about that. Casuarina pines on Waiheke, we had tons of them. They look very similar to Echinacea. Supposed to be made up of a bunch of silica as well. But different forms. Horsetail or Echinacea grows on the ground. It's not on tree, and so there's a difference there. There's difference in, okay, now we're using bark, different acidities, like it's just a different sort of structure to it. Echinacea also grows seasonally, like grows up and then turns brown and falls over and dies. Casuarina is yearly, never changes. It's there all the time. So like, is there a difference in the fluctuation? Is there a better time of the year than to be picking Casuarina boughs, off the tree versus Echinacea off the ground? So are they similar? Yes. Should we do more? Should we be aware that differences? Yes. And just go from there. Could you take and use a cow skull or a sheep intestine instead of a cow intestine? Like, yes. Like, could you use a boar? Like, there's things to try, but also, what are you trying to get out of it? What's the reasoning?
Yeah. I don't think there was a whole lot of that kind of chatter at the conference.
Oh, I just saw some little post about something. So
it was it was pretty good actually. Like we, if more people want to get into making these preparations, what do we need to know? Storage and
Yeah.
how's it been done and who's been doing it and what are the lessons you've learned and yeah, no, it's good.
Great. No, but that concept comes up a lot. You know, people always want to push the boundaries, and that's a great part of magic is experimentation. This is all experimentation. So, you know,
Yeah.
questions arise when you start doing things. You know, inspiration hits, and you go, "Oh, well, I have a bunch of this. Could I use that?" Okay. Well, do you understand the components of it? You know, can you look at the bark and tell me if it's a fire, a wind, or a water tree? Like, can you tell me like can you look at the leaves and tell me if it's a, you know, a fire or a water or a air tree? Can you, you know, like, can you describe in these terminologies what you're seeing and then understand the influences that you're putting and why you're influencing this? Why am I putting something that's going to dry and change the context of my soil over here when I don't need it to be? Oh, because it was compost. I had it. Oh, well, did you, you know, what did you learn?
And it's a little bit like cooking that way, yeah. That
Yeah, definitely.
when we're making a I don't know, some complex Thai or Indian or even Italian dish, and we're chucking stuff in and playing with it freely, when we eat it, we feel the difference, and the garden does too.
Yeah, totally.
Playing around with stuff, yeah.
And that's, I mean, play is wonderful. Like, it's one of those childish things, like imagination to me. You know, these things as adults that I wouldn't say we're forced out of, but they just don't seem to be as useful to us in our daily lives. It's not a tool that I don't need to be daydreaming all day. Well,
Are there some professions that do get to play professionally, like sports people and musicians and artists and poets and writers are expected to play?
Yeah.
Should farmers be expected to play?
Oh, I think they do, don't they? Like, I mean, every year you're usually,
They should be, I think. Like, you know, it would be nice to hear farmers go, oh, I'm having a go at this, or I'm trying this, or I'm playing with this, not with a, this is a scientific experience with this, experiment with this hypothesis, and have an investor going, oh, it didn't work, you failed. No, it was a playful
I think
exploration.
most farmers, in my opinion, are always doing that. Like, they're always trying something, they're trying new, or yeah, you live off of your, you know, your history and that data that we were talking about earlier, you know, knowing your site, but at the same time, you know, you might try something different. You're always trying.
Call it tinkering, not playing.
Yeah, but it's still play. Even if you're doing the same thing over, I'm still playing. You know, for me, it's like, again, going back to the counter, like, okay, I'm playing on this day. We're gonna make compost. That's play to me, like, because it's a process, right? Yeah, it's work. Transplanting's play. Like, it's still work, but it's still play to me. Like, because I'm taking a living thing and moving it around. Like, there's, yeah, I find it as play. Yeah, tinkering or playing. Yeah, it's very playful energy. And again, I think it's that childhood. Like, there's great stories of children in gardens, and, you know, the fanciness of that, the imagination, the fairies, the gnomes, the ability to see without conjecture, sort of thing. You're not seeing what you're told, you're seeing what you want to see. And I think that's a wonderful tool to have in a garden, in my mind, to that imagination. I think that leads to curiosity, which leads to, you know, more observation, and observation there leads to learning.
And the curiosity is open-mindedness, which allows for anything to happen.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Imagination, right? If you can't imagine what you're doing, then how are you going to do it? Oh, I got a plan. Okay, can you even someone that looks at a plan, oh, here's a plan of how to build a bookcase. Okay, can I picture that? I can't really build it. I can start going through it. Oh, I put the screw in there. Okay, I'm just doing that. At some point, you start to see the bookcase.
Mm.
You start to understand, oh, that piece is a shelf. Oh, that's going to be a wall. Oh, it starts to take form.
Mm.
And being able to work on that tool to be able to see that bookcase without having to get there halfway through it. Can I look at the instructions and picture that bookcase without having to get halfway through it or all the way through it, depending on how much you practice doing that skill. It's a skill.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like opening a book of an orchestra score and being able to read and hear
Exactly
what it sounds like before. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Music. I mean, music's one of those languages that allows you to, because that's what it is really. When you look at a sheet of music, it's screaming at you because it's words. It's words on the page,
Mm.
different
And so for you, when you look at a calendar, whether it's like that or the biodynamic association one, is it color or sound or feelings or movement? What's the story that speaks to you?
So I guess if I'm going to talk about it that way, it's more, it'd be the year. So I'd be probably picking up and looking at what does this year unfold. If I'm getting my brand new calendar in the mail and I'm going to pop it open like a magazine the first day and I'm going to look through it, I'm looking at what are the cool things happening this year? Hey, what's my season going to look like? Do I have, my growing season? What are my descending weeks going to be? Do I have, 2 root days? Do I have 2 flower days? Like I'm getting a glimpse at the future, basically, right?
So you're getting a sense of the forces of the plants.
I'm getting a sense of the forces of the season at that point. What are the planetary? We're talking about a biodynamic calendar. We're talking about planetary movements. So what are the planetary influences going to be this year? Unless you have, again, the ability to look ahead, pull out an ephemeris, silly word, and be able to do the calculations to tell you what 2025 is going to be. 98% of biodynamic farmers out there couldn't tell you what 2023 season is going to look like until their calendar shows up in their mailbox. They just don't know because they don't know how to do the math. And it's hard. It's not easy, but it's, and it's just not something that's taught, right? Here's the tool. Someone's done the work for us. Now I can look at it. So again, I'm looking at it as a magazine. It's like my seed calendar showing up. Okay, what do I get? What's my year going to look like? And highlight those seeds. Oh, all right, that could be an interesting one. That could be interesting. I'm looking for things that I want to see, like we were talking about. Oh, that's going to be a cool conjunction. That's something different, And some you get to see yearly. Some you get to see multi times a year. But it's looking forward. It's this. What's the word I'm looking for? It's imagination of the coming year. Can you picture how wonderful your tomatoes are going to taste at the end of the summer? Can you picture, and then you didn't picture that storm was going to hit you in June and just, knock you over. But, those some things you didn't picture. Yeah. So it's definitely playful for me. And then I'm looking at it structurally after that. So then I'm looking at, okay, what are my tasks? What do I need to do this year? Can I help myself make myself hit my bench points that I'm trying to achieve and that I want to get done?
Yeah. No. Cool. My energy's peaking.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
No, it's 2 hours.
Yeah.
You can talk.
I'd ramble.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and